One. Hello, everyone. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, and that means it's time to begin our 75th CoCoRaHS Weather Talk webinar. Wow, 75 of them already. We've got a bunch of them that we've had over the years, and it's great to be with you today. Well, a very warm welcome to all of you out there joining us today. I'm your host, meteorologist Henry Regis. Running the technical side of our program is our very own Noah Newman. We're coming to you live from overcast Fort Collins, Colorado. It looks like we've got some snow in the forecast here for this weekend. For all of those of you who are unable to join us for our live broadcasts, we're recording today's talk, and it will be available later this week on our website. All of our Weather Talk webinars are sponsored by generous donations from listeners just like you. Well, today's webinar is about NOAA's long-established citizen observation program, the Co-op Network. And our guest today is Amy Fritz. Amy is the National Co-op Program Manager with NOAA's National Weather Service located in Silver Spring, Maryland. Amy, originally from Seattle, Washington, went on to receive a bachelor's degree in atmospheric sciences from the University of Washington. She followed that up with a master's in meteorology at Penn State University and a master's in physical oceanography from North Carolina State University. That's my alma mater. Besides working at the National Weather Service's headquarters in Silver Spring, Amy's career has taken her to the Northwest Weather and Avalanche Center and the National Weather Service Seattle office on Sandpoint Bay. Amy is an avid skier, hiker, fly fisher, and recently a chapter author in the bestseller book series, Overcoming Mediocrity, Unstoppable Women. Well, let's give a big CoCoRaHS welcome to our good friend, Amy Fritz. Amy, it's great to have you with us today.
Henry, can you hear me?
I can hear you. There we go.
Can you see me? There we are. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you for inviting me to be on your show.
Well, this is great. Great to have you. Hey, so we're going to start off. We ask everybody, all of our guests, the same question at the beginning, and that is, how did you become interested in weather? So we'll start off with that, and then we'll let you take it away.
Well, like many people, we all have a story related to weather that brought us into this. Mine was not any one particular storm or event, but really an accumulation of events. If you've ever been to Seattle or know anything about their climate, you know that snowstorms are a pretty rare event. Most of the winter is spent drizzly and wet and rainy. So when it did snow, it was kind of an exciting time, especially for me as a child. And fond memories, if anyone out there has toddlers, you can relate to this. They don't always sleep through the night. Well, I would wake up regularly if it snowed and tap my little hand on my dad's bedroom door and tell him, Dad, it's snowing. The snow woke me up. Can we watch it out the window? And he would very graciously, even if it was 2 in the morning on a work night, he and I would walk out to the living room and I would stand on the back of the couch and we would peer out the window and watch the flakes fall in the street light across the way from us. And these are some of my fondest memories. And it was like clockwork. If it snowed, I would wake up and notice. Those nighttime snowstorms were my dad's worst nightmare, but also best friend, because those are some of the fondest memories I share with my dad. And it was that unusual being woken up by snow, which we all know is a very quiet event most of the time, unless you get grapple, sleet, or thunder mixed in with it, which then can make it loud. But that phenomena of waking up because it was snowing outside was what really brought me into weather. I have always had a passion for the snow. I love playing in the snow. We had a wonderful snowy winter here in Maryland, which delighted me to no end. And I'm thrilled for you all who are getting a late season snowstorm in your area. But I know not everyone shares my passion. So some of you wish you had the weather we have right outside my window, which is sunny. And I think we're going to break a record today. It's about 74 degrees outside. So with that note, I will go ahead and get started with my presentation.
Thanks, Amy. It's all yours.
Thank you. And please confirm with me if you can see my slides.
Not yet.
Oh, getting there. The last button. We practiced this. I know we did. There's the green button I was looking for. Thank you, everyone out there, for bearing with me. And here we go. Now can you see my slides?
Looks good.
Wonderful. Thank you. So as the National Cooperative Observer Program Manager, I am happy to be on your CoCoRaHS webinar Weather Talk today. And I'm going to share a little bit of history about the co-op program. First, though you may not know, some of you do, some of you don't, our program is 130 years old. It started with the Organic Act of 1890, which makes it one of the oldest weather observing networks in the United States and also globally. So this act of Congress is also what started the Weather Bureau, which later became known as the Weather Service. And what did Congress ask us to do? But to observe meteorology, in particular capturing maximum and minimum daily temperatures, snowfall, and daily precipitation totals. All of this becomes our climate record we know and love today. So what else does the co-op program do? Well, being nestled within the National Weather Service, naturally, we provide information that goes into supporting our forecasts, our watches, our warnings, and other services that we provide to the public, such as flash floods, or like some of you may have right now, a red flag warning because we haven't seen much rain in a while. So the co-op observations are very important to the National Weather Service, as are the CoCoRaHS observations. I don't want to leave them out because they're just as important. So the co-op has about 8,100 sites and over 10,000 volunteers. And you may be saying to yourself, why the difference? Well, that's because a lot of our sites, about 2,000 of them, have a backup volunteer as well, and we consider them as part of the program. They're just as important as their primary volunteer. When we ran a recent query of our database wondering, wow, how many sites do we have for over 100 years? We came up with about 2,000, which is pretty impressive. So if you notice in my pictures, I love to show a little bit of history. You can see some photos from the 1930s, just to flash back in time to how long our program's been around. I particularly love their wardrobe that they wore back then. So to go into the program, tell you a little bit about the equipment that we use. Our first is for measuring temperature, in which, yes, our program started with liquid and glass thermometers. That's those old mercury thermometers we used to use, and also not as well known, but the minimum alcohol thermometer. And that's the one that you sling around and move the alcohol to the bottom to measure the minimum temperature. For precipitation measurements, much like CoCoRaHS, we too have rain gauges. We have our favorite beloved standard 8-inch rain gauge, which you will see me and my assistant Tom Trunk standing next to in the upper right corner. We also use what we refer to as the plastic 4-inch rain gauge, and also the Fisher-Porter rain gauge, which is the weighing rain gauge that collects rainfall amounts every hour. And some other equipment that you may not be as familiar with, we have the evaporation pan shown in the lower right corner, and as you would be familiar, the snowfall and snow depth measuring equipment, the snow stick, the snow stake, and the snowboard, much like you guys. So you may be asking, well, where are all these 8,000 sites distributed throughout the United States? Are they all in CONUS? And the answer to that is they're in CONUS and beyond. We have sites as far east as the US Virgin Islands, as far north as Barrow, Alaska, or better known today as Ujakvik, Alaska, and also, as you can see in this picture, out to Hawaii. But we don't stop there. When moving west, here's a picture of what our sites look out in the Pacific Ocean. Just to give you a little reference, here's Hawaii. Here's our sites in America Samoa, over in Guam, and if you think that's the farthest west, not quite. We even have them in Palau. So that gives you an idea of about how far and broad our sites are located, which is pretty exciting that we cover so much of the globe. So next, you're probably wondering, where can I get my hands on all this valuable data, especially if you wanted to know what the highest temperature was in Palau yesterday? Well, you can find it from our National Centers for Environmental Information. A little bit about NOAA. National Weather Service is, quote, a line office within, and as is NESDIS, the satellite folks. And underneath the satellite folks, that's where you'll find the National Center for Environmental Information. If you're not familiar with that name, it's because they were once also called the National Centers for Data, the National Climate Data Center, NCDC. So here's where you can get a hold of some of our information. Our daily observations are found on their Global Historical Climate Network daily product. And the web link is there for you. And it's available on the website in my slides. Next, you may be wondering, well, gosh, if I want to know more about these sites, where can I get my hands on their metadata? And you can find that in their Historical Observing Metadata Repository, also known as HOMER. And that will give you information on how old some of the sites are, where they're located, and other details about their instrumentation. And last but not least, if you want to get your hands on some really old records, before we went digital, all of our observations were written down on paper forms. And if you want to see some of those original paper forms, you can do so at the Images Publications System, IPS, part of NCEI. And the web address is once again listed below. And just to give you an idea of what some of those look like, I have an example for you. This particular recording is from Ellensburg, Washington in May of 1980. And I highlight the notes over in the right-hand column with a red box. You may be wondering what they say, and it reads, ash, heavy in air. You might be wondering what was going on at that time. Well, let's see. Here's another observation from Yakima, Washington, from the same month and year. And they also make mention of something volcanic and slight film on top of water. I'm assuming they saw something on top of the rain gauge. So for all of you who want the answer to our trivia question, what could they have been observing? It was the eruption of Mount St. Helens, which, having grown up in Seattle and lived there at that time, I do remember this event. And this reminds me of a wonderful point I like to make, that yes, within the National Weather Service, we recognize the importance of our forecast watches and warnings, but I like the quote that our director, Dr. Uccellini, said recently in a ceremony, and that is, forecasts are for today, but observations are forever. So if you're ever wondering to yourself, are my observations important? Absolutely, yes, they are, and we are so grateful you collect them. And you never know, you might be like some of these observers who collect information relating to a major historical event, and you may not even know it at the time. So just to go into a little bit of our CoCoRaHS co-op similarities, I'm sure by now you can all guess that we both run volunteer organizations. Our observers are not paid, much like CoCoRaHS. They are willing to do this on their own time, on their own dime, because they're passionate about weather, they're passionate about the mission, and boy, we sure do appreciate all that they do for us. These are some of the most dedicated volunteers you can find, and we are very grateful for it. What else is similar? Well, as you saw in my picture before, you may have recognized one of those gauges. It's very similar to the CoCoRaHS rain gauge. Yes, that's right. We both use the same plastic 4-inch rain gauge. Minor difference, ours has a metal ring for mounting bracket. Our volunteers tend to like that a little better as it's a little easier to get in and out during those really cold months. Some differences. We have to give our hat off to all of you CoCoRaHS volunteers who collect hail observations. You guys certainly set a high bar for how to collect hail, especially with your hail pads. We are really appreciative of it. And we know that you guys know the size and the density and really unique observations about hail. In fact, the hail records you guys collect tend to be some of the best in the globe, and we're very appreciative of that. For us in co-op, we only note that it hailed. We don't go into all the details necessarily that you guys do. However, just to go back to differences, we collect temperature, might be something you want to consider in the future, and also hourly precipitation. One of my favorite parts about co-op is the awards, and I would encourage you in CoCoRaHS to consider doing something similar. Here is an example, a gentleman receiving his Length of Service Award. He happens to be a Coloradan, receiving his 25-year anniversary Length of Service Award. We give them out after 10 years, every 5 years. And once you get up in years, the awards start to have special names like Ruby Stump. They tend to be named after really important volunteers, those who volunteered for the longest or really important events within history. In addition to that, we give honored institution awards, such as this one that went out to the Arkansas Valley Research Center for 125 years. Then we also have Meritus Awards for people who go above and beyond. They're the folks who report every single observation, not missing a day, including those dry days. Yes, these are our zero heroes, to use the co-op phrase. They give us impeccable records. Back when they were handwritten, they had some of the best hand penmanship out there. They usually know important details. If significant weather happens, they're the ones to call us and let us know. We are very grateful. To receive a home award, you need to be around for 20 years and nominated by your local office. Then Once you've been a home award, our most prestigious award is the Thomas Jefferson Award. These are only given out to 5 volunteers a year, and oftentimes these ceremonies are accompanied by members of Congress or the governor or other important officials. So we're very proud of our volunteers, and we're delighted to be able to give them recognition. In addition to recognition, the World Meteorological Organization, also known as WMO, has recognized some of our sites that have been around for 100 years. In particular, this past year, our Charleston, South Carolina site received this award recognition. This is a picture of the Custom House, U.S. Custom House, where once observations were taken, and a copy of their certificate. So here's me. This is a snowstorm I happened to be in a few years ago where I measured, yes, that's 36 inches of snow. And with that, I conclude my presentation because I know sometimes the best parts of these conversations are the questions we receive. So with that, Henry and Noah, I turn it back to the questions. Let's hear from the audience.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. And there's the information on there about the co-op network. We'll leave that up for you, and we'll also have that on our website. So we'll start taking questions. If you guys have any, we'll try to answer them the best we can, and we will go with that. So go ahead and type in your question, and then type in the city and state that you are in.
And Amy, if possible, if you could keep your last slide up so we could see the contact information and everything while we've got the questions going.
I will be glad to. Help
Thanks.
me out with the technology so that I... All right, I can see it. Can you all see it on your end now?
We cannot, but I can pull up our regular. I'll pull up our page, no problem.
Okay, well, here's a good one to start off with. And this person writes in and wants to know, how do you become a co-op observer? That's an excellent question.
Excellent question. All of our recruiting happens at the local level. So once my slide is back up, you can see our website, www.weather.gov. You probably already have it bookmarked and know who these fine folks are. But I would reach out to your local weather forecast office and ask them how you can become a part of our co-op network or other volunteer observing organizations we have. Other programs that we have, such as Weather Spotter. They also can help you if you want to become a CoCoRaHS volunteer as well. We recruit for both. We're more than happy to be a partner with you guys.
And can you mention a little bit what is required of somebody if they are a co-op observer? So it's a little more rigorous than CoCoRaHS.
Yes, we're looking for folks who are willing to be around. We kind of think of it, are you willing to make a decade's commitment? First of all, and also every single day. Yes, that includes spring break and Christmas. So it's a bit more rigorous. We're looking for folks who are willing to take that observation every day, 365 days a year for quite a while. So, because it's the long-term record that really adds to the value for us. If you're not quite ready to commit to all that, CoCoRaHS is definitely a way to get your feet wet and get started with it. No pun intended.
And the observations, is that 1 a day, 2 a day? What time a day?
Yes. So they're daily observations. Most everyone takes their observation at 7 o'clock in the morning, your local time. Though we do have some people who take them in the evenings. So that's something that you'll want to set up with your local office. What would be best for the office and for you, because they're one of the primary beneficiaries of it. So, but most of them are at 7 in the morning.
Great. Okay, here's a question from Keith. He wants to know, are co-op stations suited to suburban settings?
They are in both suburban, agriculture, and downtown metropolitan areas. So we have them all over the place. Some places were once rural and the cities have grown up around them. Others were established in the city, like we have, for instance, an observing site in Central Park, New York City. So, but most of them are out in agricultural rural areas.
Okay, here's one from Cindy. She wants to know, who uses your data, and do they use CoCoRaHS and co-op data at the same time? And so what are the data used for?
So yes, lots of folks use our data. I could take the rest of the hour to talk about who all uses our data. But first we do. at the National Weather Service. And yes, we use your CoCoRaHS data too. They're both very valuable. They help us with things like if we have major heavy rain events for flash flooding, or if we find ourselves with a lot of snow on the ground and then a warm up and followed by rain, then we can start to think about flash flooding and our river levels. So the river forecast centers use them. We use them at the local office. We use them nationally. They go into our climate record, for instance, the maximum highs and lows. They use them for looking at climate change. A big user of them you may not be aware of is USDA for their agriculture insurance programs. And they use our data to determine if there's been significant drought or reasons for crop damage that are weather related for their insurance program. Just some examples. But they also go into things like within Army Corps of Engineers for their engineering designs and for dam construction and for housing construction and for building codes and how much insulation to put in your house. There's a ton of use for them.
Thanks. Here's one from Pat, and Pat wants to know, Pat in Fort Collins, describe the gauge equipment that gives the hourly amounts.
Yes, the Fisher Porter weighing rain gauge. So if you can imagine inside that, I don't know, it looks kind of like a rocket to me, like a small rocket. But on the inside of that is a bucket that collects the rain. And as the rain collects, the bucket gets heavier. As it gets heavier, it pulls down on a scale. And that is reported now way back. It used to be reported on a trace needle with a rotating barrel drum or punch tape, which would punch a hole in the tape like every hour or so. And that's how it was originally recorded. Thank goodness over modern technologies, we've been able to retrofit those to be more digital. So now that information is recorded onto a hard drive, which then can be read to a thumb drive and mailed in that way. So that's kind of how those work. Did she have any more questions about those?
No, that looks like it. And John was wondering, as we look at precipitation observations, they seem to vary a lot from airport measurements. So can you talk a little bit about that, why it's important to have a lot of co-op observers out there?
Yes, coverage is always very important because if you've ever looked at our radar, especially in the springtime, you will notice that rain does not fall uniformly across the plains. We can have showers pouring down on one city block and completely dry 2 blocks away. And so even though we may have observers right next to airports, that may be that just because they're close doesn't mean they're going to catch the same amount of rain. Rainfall is not uniform. So that's one thing, but then also different types of equipment. Our weighing rain gauges tend to be the best that you can get out there. Whereas the tipping bucket, sometimes they miss a little bit. We have different requirements for whether it's at an airport within the ASOS program or if it's a part of the co-op. Co-op tends to have the most rigorous requirements for measuring rain because of our use of the data. So the airport sites may or may not be as rigorous. However, if we have an observer, they're likely using the same equipment and they should be relatively close as far as accuracy is concerned. Oftentimes, the difference we see is just because the rain fell differently in different places. I hope that answers your question, John.
Here's a question from Teresa from South Carolina and also from Scott. Similar questions. They want to know if a regular person can procure the thermometer and the Stevenson shelter that you have. Is there places where you can buy this equipment?
Not so much for the Maxmin thermometer necessarily. It's one of the problems that we have is that a lot of our equipment is aging. It's been around for a very long time. And so even we have a hard time finding it. If you email me, amy.fritz@noaa.gov, I can let you know which exactly the thermometer is or the thermistor that we use. But understand that it's a thermistor, which measures resistance based on temperature. And that's run through a cable into a house and read out on a Nimbus display. So the thermistor is actually measuring resistance. Without the Nimbus display unit, which shows the digital output of the temperature, you really aren't getting much information from it other than electrical resistance, which I don't know if you're an electrician, but it's not very useful without the display. However, I can let you know what the equipment is that we use.
Okay, Michael writes in and wants to know if a volunteer's location isn't ideal, what are the acceptable parameters for a co-op observer?
Okay, so what are we looking for as far as their site is concerned, or?
I guess, yeah. So I guess if somebody wanted to be a co-op observer, but their location is not the most ideal spot, what would you accept?
Well, it depends on what you're offering to collect. If it's rainfall, you could probably find a spot in your yard so long as it's free and clear from trees and other overhanging obstructions. If it's temperature you're talking about, then we want to make sure that you don't have any shadows covering it, such as from trees, that it's not near any large paved areas or buildings. So it really depends on what you're asking about. But yes, sighting is one of the concerns that we have, and we want to make sure that you're in a free, clear spot so that you're not going to have anything modifying what you're observing.
Doug writes in and he wants to know, he's not sure when he started reporting. How can he find out his starting date? So can he email you, and do you have that information?
I would recommend you contact your local office because they probably have it on hand. And if not, if you do email me, I'll put you in touch with them because they would be able to better help you with that. But yes, we do have a database where we can pull it up, but they'll need to know some information from you to be sure they get the right date for you.
So Doug, your local National Weather Service office is who you want to contact for that information.
Yeah. Did Doug give us his city and state?
I didn't see it on there.
Okay. Yeah, I'll let you
if you
look
can
it up.
type that in, we'll follow up back up with you.
Yeah.
Here's one from Marty. He wants to know, have the US CRN stations reduce the need for co-op sites?
The USCRN, that must be the Climate Research Network?
I think that might be the one. I used to know those acronyms and I've forgotten.
If that's it, if it's the USCRN, if it's the one I'm thinking of, they only deployed about 10 or 20 sites, as I recall. It was a project that got off the ground and had really good start, but they weren't able to deploy to everywhere that they were hoping. So no, if you know anything about what we said about precipitation, we really, the more the merrier. So they've augmented what we collect, but certainly would not replace us. We're irreplaceable.
There you go. Kathy wants to know from Wisconsin, who makes the prototype for the gauges you use? So I guess the two different gauges, we know Productive Alternatives probably provides the 4-inch gauge. That's a group out of Fergus Falls, Minnesota that does our CoCoRaHS gauges as well. What about the 8-inch gauge?
That one, we post solicitations through the competitive government process for purchasing things. And it depends on who our best bid is for it. So not just lowest cost, but who can get us exactly what we're looking for in a timely manner. So it really depends on who gives us the best bid. It isn't just one company. So, but if you wanted to know who we used the last time, I'd have to look that information up.
Okay, great.
But if you could collect that, I would do my best to get back to this person.
And we'll send you all these questions at the end so you can take a look at them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So if we miss your question, again, we will try to have Amy follow up with you. We're going to try to get as many in as we can, but at this point, we'll see. Kenneth wants to know, does each volunteer purchase their own gauge? And he's from Newport News in Virginia.
Well, Kenneth, no, that's part of the program is we provide the equipment and we maintain it. So we ask that you keep a good eye on your site, make sure everything's working properly, try to keep the weeds down and so forth. But part of the program is we have our staff go out to your site and make sure everything's set up and working correctly. We try to visit our sites at least once a year. Some of them require 2 visits per year. And if you have an emergency or something's not working, then we'll also do that as well. Go out and visit, make sure everything's working. So it's provided by the government.
So Tommy, our friend in Staunton, Virginia, wants to know, what should a co-op observer do when they go on vacation? Do they need to find a backup, or do they never leave the house for the next 50 years?
You're never allowed to leave.
That's it. No, sorry, guys. Once you're in, you're in.
No, we ask that you find a backup volunteer. Oftentimes people have a family member or a neighbor. Of course, with COVID, we've got to be careful with that. But usually we ask that you have a backup volunteer because, yes, people do tend to go on vacation or enjoy a holiday. And also in case something happens, if you get sick or something, it's good to have a backup.
So Roy wants to know, he's got a Davis weather station and he wants to know, with minute-by-minute observations, could he use that if he was a co-op observer?
Well, unfortunately, not for co-op because of our requirements that we need to meet for a standard for accuracy and precision. Now, I know you may say, but the manufacturer says it will meet your requirements. That may be true, but it still has to be vetted through through us. We have a whole center dedicated to verifying these claims. That's the Sterling Field Support Center, where we will rigorously test equipment before we deploy it. We have chambers where we temperature test everything, including wet bath check, because we want to make sure that those manufacturers' claims are exactly what they are. Some of the harder claims for them to reach is our minimum temperature requirement. Yes, all the way down to -80, depending on where you are. So -80 degrees, that's a real tough one for a lot of manufacturers to reach. And then on the high end too, we want to make sure that on those real extreme days, you're not going to miss a record because of inaccuracies. So we appreciate it. And yes, I know Davis is a wonderful instrument, and they're great for uses such as just being aware of what the weather's doing. But when it comes to our climate record, especially with billions of dollars sitting on it, we've got to make sure everything's very, very, very accurate. But I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Steve from Tipton, Indiana, he's a co-op observer, and he writes, he wants to know how many different co-op weather station types are there? Says, we are an ag station with soil temperature over bare ground and covered ground.
How many different types, such as the soil around or climate? Because, well, I think everyone can say that most of us live in somewhere that's pretty unique. So 8,000 sites, no two are the same. However, if he's talking about what kind
the
of
type of station, I think. So is it,
okay, so
are all
there's
stations alike, or some specialized with soil temperature and some may not have that? If you're an ag station, you wouldn't probably have that in the city on a rooftop or whatever.
Right. So the two primary things that we collect are temperature and precipitation, but then we also have evaporation. And if you have snowfall, because not every site has snowfall, then you collect that too. But we categorize them by three main types: our climate sites, our hydro sites, and then I forget the name of the other one. I know my friend Tim Kearns is going to have my head, but there's A, B, and C is how we classify them. And so depending on what you're collecting, like a hydro site probably is going to focus on precipitation, whereas a climate site is going to look at both. I hope that answers your question.
Michael in Walker, West Virginia writes, he says, do volunteers enter their data manually, or is the equipment Wi-Fi dependent? He says some areas, such where he lives, lack broadband and cellular data is the only option.
Yes, so we have Weathercoder, which is our computer-based program that sends it over the internet. And however, if you do not have internet, we also have our phone system. Its name is IV Rocks. Don't ask me what that stands for, IV-ROCS. But it's where you dial in your observations for folks who don't have internet. And in fact, it's been around longer than the internet. So that should answer your question.
Don writes, he was wondering, he had heard that the co-op network was full from a spatial distribution perspective. He wants to know, do you welcome new stations, and do you consider topography in welcoming new stations?
So yes, we do welcome new stations where we have a requirement for it. So if your neighbor's already a co-op volunteer, then chances are we don't have a requirement unless your neighbors are 10 miles apart. Typically though, our spatial distribution, we try to make it by 1/4 of a degree by 1/4 of a degree for some of our numerical models that we run. Some places we have higher, closer neighbors, if you will, co-op sites, higher density. And in other places, like in the Rocky Mountains or other areas where it's not very populated, we have fewer volunteers. So there are areas, yes, where we are still looking for volunteers. We do not have a completely full network. There's definitely room for more.
And Keith had written in, and I think you answered this earlier, what is the financial commitment for a full co-op station for a new observer? Again, you guys cover all of that, correct?
Yes, we're looking for your time. We will provide the equipment. I think we get off better.
All right, here we go. Gail writes in, do you go into schools to educate children about the co-op program?
I personally have not, but our local offices do tend to send people for outreach and education. And if you're looking for someone to give a talk on something like this, that's who I would reach out to. Of course, I would love to, but they need me here at headquarters.
Hey, this is Noah. Really quick. Nolan chimed in and wanted to add that the US CRN is the climate reference network, and they've got about 200 stations nationwide. But as Amy mentioned, that certainly supplements the data across the country, but far from replaces anything like co-op for sure.
Thank you so much for coming up with those numbers. I appreciate it. Considering we have around 8,000 sites and that's only 200, I don't think they're going to replace us anytime soon. But yes, definitely augment the information we collect. Thank you for that.
And Gail from Arizona wants to know, is your data used by NASA?
I do believe it is, but I would have to confirm on that, though I can't imagine why they wouldn't.
All right.
So it's just not one that I'm very familiar with.
Oh, I just lost one here. Here we go. And Michelle Margraf also mentions here, she works for the Weather Service. The third type of co-op site is a meteorological sea site. So just mentioning that on there.
She can slap my wrist for forgetting that one on the site. Hi, Michelle. I'm so glad you're part of the presentation today.
Catherine wants to know, what if I move? What do I do there?
So if you're going to move, please let us know ahead of time, because we would like to find another volunteer to replace you. That doesn't mean you can't be a volunteer at your new location, but we would want to be able to continue the climate record that you started. So if you let us know, then we can begin the process to look for a replacement for you, hopefully within the same climatic region as you, so relatively close by. But yeah, and then if you wanted to continue your service, depending on where you move to, if we have a need for you there, then you'd be able to pick it up where you move to.
So Katie in Cleveland, Ohio wants to know, how do you report storms? So I know you can report precip and stuff. Can you report like thunderstorms or that type of stuff as well? And how do you do that?
Yes. And in the Weathercoder, when folks turn in their observations, there's a section there where you can leave notes. And so if you were to note thunderstorms at the time, then you would put those in the notes. Or if you had hail, then you would note that. So there are definitely places where you can add more details than just the precipitation and the temperature that you measured. And those are very valuable. Like I showed you in my presentation on the paper forms, sometimes those notes are the most important part of the observation.
So a question, I know a lot of students always wondered, how many classes can you miss before you fail the class? Joel here writes and wants to know, how many missed observations are permitted before the National Weather Service reevaluates whether or not your site will continue to report?
NCEI would be the ones who would be able to answer that. Honestly, I don't know, but I know it's something like 2 observations missed in a month, and that flags the quality on it. And maybe Michelle has an answer on this one. I may have to shoot to my friend Michelle on that, but it's very few. So if you're missing more than 2 or 3 in a month, then you can imagine you'll be flagged for QC on that. But
well,
I know our
2 or 3 over the 10 years. No, you got to.
No, it's not 2 or 3 over the 10 years, because we definitely have people who will miss more than that. And it depends on the usage. So you may be turning in your observations and you may miss a couple in a month, and it may or may not flag. If, however, you missed a couple weeks, then we'll have to look into that to see what was missing. And it depends. If you have an hourly weighing rain gauge where all that's being recorded onto a hard drive where we can pull it off, then even though you didn't report it in, we can still get those observations off of your device. And the same is true with the Nimbus display unit, that they do have memory in them. So if you're gone for a day or two and you missed your observation, you can recall the memory on your Nimbus display. So we prefer that they be turned in every day, 365 days a year, and on leap year. However, we do have a little bit of a backup built in so that if you miss an observation, we can still get the data from you.
Thanks. Judy wants to know, can you explain the difference between this and the Weather Spotter program?
So a lot of it has to do with the commitment. So when you're in the co-op program, this is the most rigorous commitment that we ask for your time and not moving, and as you can tell, being a long-term part of our program. Whereas the spotter program, it doesn't necessarily have those rigorous requirements. What we're looking for in the spotter program, and I know the local offices can give you a much better explanation, but to my best ability, we're looking for eyes on the ground to notice those funnel clouds, or to notice the hail, or to notice the thunderstorms, for us helping out with our watches and warnings. So they're similar in that we both observe the weather, but they're different in the nature and the commitment required. And also the training is different for the Weather Spotter program versus the co-op program.
And Marty writes in, he says it's 10 or more missed observations in a month results in an M next to the average. So that is.
Thank you. I'm so glad someone can look that up for me.
There we go. Okay. How does a non-professional get access to your detailed data, and is there a charge for that?
So from my presentation, you'll be able to go back, click on the website from the CoCoRaHS website and download my slides. And in there, you will find that I included the links for the Global Historical Climate Daily product. Now I don't have it in front of me and I can't say it, but also the paper records that was on the IPS system. If you want to go back and look at some really old ones, you can see the paper records too. And they're free of charge. I made those slides just the other day for everyone.
Okay, here's a attendee in North Dakota. They want to know, they live in Western North Dakota. Are the stations all filled up in Western North Dakota? I would think not. I would think there's a lot of empty space out there. You could probably use more observers.
Very likely. The Dakotas tend to be a place, especially with low population, depending on where you are. I would definitely reach out to your local office, depending on where you are in North Dakota, and ask them if they're looking for a volunteer, because they could possibly benefit from your observations. It would be delighted to have them. And if not, then you can always join the CoCoRaHS network or become a weather spotter. There's lots of opportunities. We're always looking for volunteers, and we're happy that you're willing to.
Kathy writes in, she wants to know who creates new ideas for gauges and who decides if they should be used. So when you guys are looking at, maybe there's a better gauge out there, or we probably need to try something different. Who makes those decisions?
Well, me, partly, and
Okay.
my leadership within the Office of Observations, and also the National Weather Service senior leadership makes some of those decisions. So it's really a group effort. But a lot of times, really great ideas come from our local offices, quote, from the field. And so those ideas will be vetted to us, first through their regions and then to me. And then we will make a decision as a group if we want to pursue this and moving on forward and see if we can get leadership support on it. Oftentimes, these great ideas unfortunately come with a price tag. And the hardest part isn't necessarily selling this great idea, it's getting the money to be able to pursue it and to roll it out. Because remember, there's 8,000 sites. So if it only costs a couple $100, that's still $16,000 for everyone. So if I did my math on the fly correctly. But you can see how it becomes difficult. Even a cheap, simple little idea can come with a price tag.
And Phil writes in, and he's wondering, what is the best way to measure temperature, such as the height and location of the thermometer? How is the thermometer housed from direct sunlight, keeping that from hitting it? So is there a certain height off the ground, and then how do you keep that sun off that?
Yes, and I wish I could go back to my slides so that I could show you a picture of one. Is it possible for me to go back to sharing my?
We'd
Noah,
love
can
it
you
if
help there?
you go ahead and start sharing your screen again. And while you're doing that, I'll bring up that it was mentioned about the GHCN Daily, how the data from co-op are in GHCN Daily, which are available from NCEI. I want to point out that CoCoRaHS observers, any of you who have observed for more than 100 days, your data in CoCoRaHS are also in GHCN Daily and can also be found and downloaded from the NCEI website.
Noah, can you also mention quickly about the certificates that we were generating with till the new email system came about?
Sure. Thanks. So it was brought up, Amy, thank you. You guys produced those fantastic certificates for your volunteers. And we took your advice last year and started a certificate program. However, our email program that does it started basically flagging us for junk, and we had to halt that program. So we're going to improve our email system and return to the certificate program that the co-op network wonderfully encouraged us to do. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm so delighted to hear this. I know recognition can go a long way, even if it's just a certificate. All of our volunteers who receive them are very happy and grateful for that. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are doing that as well. So to go back to the question about the temperature, you can see it here in figure number 2. And it's actually quite high off the ground. I don't remember. Maybe Michelle can type in the exact height it has to be. But if I were to stand next to this device, it would be about my eye level. And what you'll notice, if you can squint really well, is it's got a top plate on it, followed by multiple other plates below it. We pet name this the beehive, in that it's a series of radiation shields that protect the sensor from solar radiation, along with other things such as elements from like hail and rain and debris and so forth. So it really just protects the sensor, but it also shields it from the radiation. The other one, the older version, is what we call the Cotton Region Shelter, and that's this wooden box in picture number 1 that stands about 3 to 4 feet off the ground. It's if I were to stand next to it and I'm 5'3", my eye level would be right about where the thermometers are, to give you kind of a sense of how high it is. And that too is the radiation shelter, if you will, for the thermometer, so they don't get hot from the sun, from the direct sunshine.
Michelle says 5 feet off the ground is what she just wrote. So
okay, wonderful. Thank you, Michelle.
you guys can tag team on this. It's pretty good.
This is great. I'm so
great
glad
to
you're
have.
going to get a nice thank you letter from me here pretty soon.
That's great. Okay, a couple more here, and then we'll kind of wind it up for today. Ashley writes, and she's a second-year meteorology student in Central Michigan University. Right now, she lives in an apartment, but will be switching locations a lot, different places. Not good to spot gauges. Is there any way she can volunteer at all? Would love to that experience. So is there something she can do? I know what do you have out there for students? Are there any chances that students can intern or do anything like that with the co-op program? Or
not necessarily so much with the co-op program. Yeah. But if you're interested in an intern position within the National Weather Service, we do have a program for that. It's called the Pathways Program, and I happen to be a prodigy of that program. It was under a former name, Student Career Employment Program, aka SCEP program, and that's where I got my start. While I was at the University of Washington, I was actually paid a very small salary, but was paid to help out around the office. I answered the phones, I helped collect the observations, and it was an excellent experience because it allowed me to get my foot in the door with the federal government. And if anyone has ever tried to get a job with the weather within the federal government, you know it's very difficult. But to be able to get those first few years as low salary or even volunteering, it's a great experience. You learn so much. I learned all about the details that go into the forecasts and working on a shift, the equipment we used, worked with a lot of the different people and the positions. I learned about the fire weather desk, and I helped cover for when some of our forecasters were assisting with the fires that we had back then, as I'm sure people can relate to now. So if you are interested, I would definitely reach out to what is your local office right now and ask them for more information. But you can also go on to usajobs.com and look for internship positions. They should be posted there.
Here's a good friend of ours, Chris in Loveland, Colorado. He's a co-op observer, and he's been a co-op observer for 17 years. He says he has an MVP for a neighbor who takes his observation while he's away, giving him the ability not to miss any observations. When you give out awards, is there any way you can recognize a person like this who helps out so much? Chris, I would say, you know, once a month, take him out to Golden Corral for dinner is probably my suggestion on that. But no, go ahead.
I would too. Unfortunately, within the awards program that I mentioned, we do not necessarily have the ability to recognize the backups, but I would talk to your local forecast office because they do have awards for such things as this, spot awards for, you know, if you happen to measure the rain during something like Hurricane Harvey, or if you've been a backup for someone who was sick for a long period of time. They do at the local level have the opportunity for such things as this, because yes, you and your backup abilities are just as important as the actual primary observer, because without you, we would have a broken record, and we really appreciate you not letting the record be broken. So thank you very much for all that you do. And to all of our secondary and backup volunteers who are listening today, thank you for all of your hard work.
And this is NOAA just a great segue, since we're talking about certificates and recognition. At the end of the webinar today, after you fill out the survey, you'll see a brand new thing, a certificate for you for attending this webinar.
Oh, that's great, Noah. That's a nice addition.
Here you go. There's our.
All right, a couple more questions here. We've got one from Jason, and he is in Madison, New Jersey. And he says, how can someone in a city community with skyscrapers measure precipitation accurately? Do they do it on rooftops or with permission from parks across the street? What do you find for co-op observers in the city?
Well, we have to find a really good spot for you. That's first and foremost. Oftentimes, we'll have observations, as you all know, taken at airports because they have big, wide open space. So they'll be co-located with the airport observing system, the ASOS automated surface observing system, but we'll also have a volunteer who uses co-op equipment co-located. That's one way we do it. I mentioned the example with New York City where we have an observer in Central Park. And it really depends. You know, most cities you can find an area where it's clear enough that you can get some observations. It may not be in the heart of the city necessarily, but relatively close.
Okay, great. Marty writes, and he's curious if you've ever been a member of a state climate extremes committee, and how does that work with when somebody sets a record? Do you have any information on that?
I know a little bit about it, but I have never been a part of the process. So what happens is, if anyone from Texas is listening, I'm sure you're going to be all excited about this because you broke some minimum records recently. But you will submit the process is the local office will submit the possible record for review. And then, yes, there's a committee that is formed, and they will very carefully and scrupulously review the observations that were collected. They will look at all kinds of information about the surrounding weather that was observed to make sure for consistencies and so forth. And they'll go into great detail to really review the record to make sure it truly does stand. For instance, one example is there was a record broken in I want to say, recently broken in Death Valley, I want to say it was, and all the way to wanting to pull the thermometer, the temperature sensor out and have it tested for accuracy just to make sure that record really does stand. So they go to great lengths to review the measurements, to check with other information, the surrounding area and so forth. And these are taken very seriously. NCEI plays a huge part in it. They have a member on the committee. The regions within the National Weather Service, you usually have someone on the committee. There's usually someone from the local office on the committee, and they go into great detail to make sure that they're correct. So good question. Thank you for bringing that up.
Cindy wants to know, do any co-opers ever get disqualified? So they have bad data or bad site or not enough observations, or, you know, I know they'll put an M in if they miss so many, but do you ever say, okay, it's time to move along?
Not that I know of, but I'm sure it probably happens. Those decisions are made more at the local level. If we have an observer who's not observing, or for whatever reason, it would be recommended that we find a new location, then they would handle those details. But I don't hear of that very often. Most of the time, I hear all the praises of how great the volunteers are. So.
Paul in Middleton Springs, Vermont wants to know, how does the co-op program fit in with the RAWS, the remote access weather stations data? So are you guys side by, you know, how does that work? If you're familiar with that.
The RAWS, not quite.
So
Well,
the RAWS gauges, you've seen those out usually by streams and so forth.
And they measure precipitation and temperature as well?
It's the big tall brown gauge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
RAWS, remote automated weather.
Remote automated. Okay. Yep.
So I would say that we augment each other, that data is also used. It's likely, if it's automated, that it's in a place where people are not living. The co-op program is most of the time located where people live or where there's an institution. So some of these sites that you're talking about automated, if I'm imagining it correctly, they're in really remote places where necessarily someone wouldn't want to live, or there just isn't anyone. So like on mountain sides and in steep terrain and so forth. Is that correct, Henry?
Yeah.
Am I remembering the right network? Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's the one. Yep.
They augment each other. However, remember, the co-op program has some of the most rigorous requirements for accuracy and precision of observations. I'm not sure what the raw standards are, but I know that the co-op program has some pretty high ones.
And Marty mentions that the RAWS is run by the Forest Service. Marty's right on top of these things today. Thanks, Marty.
Marty, you're all over it today. Thank you.
You're right. And Marty's one of our volunteers in Maryland. He's been with us a long time, and we really appreciate him out there.
This is NOAA.
Thank you for joining us, Marty.
Just to add, I think the main difference that we want to point out with ASOS, RAWS, all these different other weather networks is that the co-op really similar to CoCoRaHS is doing manual measurements. It's a person who's there checking that thermometer, checking that rain gauge. These ones that are automated are just that. It's not a person there making sure that bird poop didn't fill up and clog up the gauge, for instance.
or a beehive gets built
Exactly.
on it, or vines grow over the top of it, or that very inconvenient pine cone fell and broke apart and clogged the funnel, or yeah, any number of things. The way I like to describe it for those asking these questions is I run a volunteer program that collects climate data versus a climate program that's run by volunteers. And I hope that clarifies some of the difference. So first and foremost to us is the volunteers, and then what they collect is the observations used for our climate record. These other networks, they're collecting observations run automatically. And so it's a real big difference where your focus is. Our focus is on the volunteers. Without it, we wouldn't have the record.
We're going to take the final question of the day, and then Amy, there's a couple more here we'll let you answer offline. And this is a good one. Can young students, including middle school, have a role in the co-op program? So what is the age? Is there an age limit for co-op observers? Do you have a minimum age there?
Yes, there is a minimum age. However, there's always the however. So we prefer adults to be the primary observer. However, we do have young observers who, with their parents' permission, have elected to become our primary observer and collect the observations. Of course, there's training, a certain level of assumed maturity involved, and so forth. But yes, we have had young people, but you will need your parents' permission to do so. However, it's not outside the possibility.
Well, Amy, we want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule today to give us this great presentation and answer all these questions. We had a lot of questions in here, and you made it fun and you made it very interesting. So thank you. Again, we appreciate you. And again, CoCoRaHS is a great supporter of the Co-op network. We want to keep that network going the best we can. And so we ask if you guys are interested. Now, one thing people have always said is that CoCoRaHS is kind of like the minor leagues for the Co-op network. So it's if somebody's a good CoCoRaHS observer and they do a good job with their observations, when it comes time for looking to fill in a spot, a lot of times they'll look at CoCoRaHS. So keep up your good observations there with CoCoRaHS if you're ever interested in being a co-op observer. Okay, Amy, well, we're gonna say thanks again for today. And as we close out today's program, we want to let you know that our next Weather Talk webinar will be taking place in just about 2 months on Thursday, May 6th. So that's coming up here in 2 months. It's titled the Mount Washington Observatory, home of the world's worst weather. And I've been up there, and not in the worst weather, but it is quite a place. The record wind speed was recorded up there over 230 miles an hour. We'll have Brian Fitzgerald from the observatory with us, and he'll have a really good presentation there. So you won't want to miss this one. We'll have the registration information up on our website shortly. And before I forget, when signing off today, please take that short survey that'll pop up on your screen. Well, until we meet again, stay safe and stay healthy. This is Henry Regis for the rest of the CoCoRaHS team saying goodbye for now and wishing each of you a great week ahead.